Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 126, the final episode in this exciting and mind-blowing series on the crustaceans. So far in this series, we've looked at the evolutionary origin of crustaceans, as well as many details of their physiology, their life cycle, their behavior, and their ecology, from the basal ostracoda and their relatives to the barnacles of Thecostraca and the crabs and crayfish of Malacostraca, to the smaller, cryptic, weirdo shrimps of the Allotriocarida. Well, today, we're going to wrap up this series on the crustaceans by stepping back and taking a look at their relationship with humans. And it is a long and storied relationship that goes back to the dawn of our species. In fact, long before humans existed, long before our ancestors descended from the trees of East African forests, there were primates that preyed upon crustaceans. In tropical and subtropical jungles around the world, there are primates today that occasionally hunt and consume crabs. Now, most primates, like macaques, baboons, and chimpanzees, are omnivores. They generally prefer fruits and vegetables, and other plant parts like leaves, barks, and roots. But they'll also consume smaller animals, engaging in opportunistic carnivory for the protein. The tree canopy, the tree trunks, the root networks, and the ground itself are densely populated with centipedes, ants, beetles, and all manner of small invertebrates with pincers or jaws that can deliver a stinging pinch. It's a sensation that primates know well, and they've learned to be wary of. Crabs and crayfish are similar in a sense, as they can discourage a curious monkey with a nice firm pinch to the finger, but they still sometimes end up as monkey food. No primate feeds exclusively, predominantly, or even frequently on crabs and other crustaceans. The crustaceans seem to be a monkey meal only when they wander too close and are easy to catch, or when there's nothing else available. Not even the Macaca fascicularis, the ill-named crab-eating macaque of Southeast Asia, is all that fond of them. Populations of these monkeys in Indonesia have been seen occasionally diving into mangrove swamps to go crab fishing, but that's about it. It's not a frequent behavior. They're not dependent on the crabs or anything. They're much more likely to feed from the fruit and the trees they hang out in. It's just that crab fishing is a thing they do from time to time. Similarly, even our closest relatives, the chimpanzees and bonobos, have been observed fishing for crabs. In the Nimba Mountains of Guinea, for example, there are populations of chimpanzees that hang out around mountain rivers. They'll scrape through the mud in search of crabs, which are eagerly picked out and eaten. These chimps were seen hunting and eating crabs throughout the year, regardless of the wet or dry season, or the presence of other food sources nearby, like fruits. The only thing that correlated with crab eating was ant eating. If chimps ate more ants in a given period, like over a few days, a week or a month or something, they would typically eat less crab in that time period, and vice versa. This might suggest that ants and crabs provide a roughly similar nutrient profile, and they're similarly energy efficient to gather. Curiously, it was noticed that pregnant and nursing females, along with their young offspring, usually had higher than average crab intake, possibly due to the crab's fatty acids and mineral nutrients, which are critical for adolescent growth and neural development. If monkeys occasionally preyed on crabs, and chimpanzees more frequently prey on crabs, like there's some groups of chimpanzees that do it regularly, then it's not really a stretch of the imagination to think that our ancient human ancestors also preyed upon and ate crabs and other crustaceans. Anatomically modern humans have only been around for about 300,000 years, and there's evidence that human ancestors have been eating seafood like fish, turtles, and even crocodile for about 40,000 of those years. There's even some evidence from South Africa that humans have been harvesting and eating lobsters for 100,000 years. And that's just what we can say for sure with hard evidence that we've discovered and analyzed. There's almost certainly evidence that's been discovered but it hasn't been worked through yet or evidence that's still in the ground that hasn't been discovered that indicates humans have been hunting crustaceans and perhaps other seafood for much longer. The scholarly estimates are that we've been eating seafood, including crabs, for nearly 2 million years. But in my non-expert opinion, I'm inclined to think that even this might be an underestimate. Somewhere out there, there's almost certainly some 3, 4, maybe even 5 million year old hominin corpse with fish in its belly, or some trove of rocks shaped into eating utensils mixed among a scattered pile of crushed crab shells. I'd wager that humans and our ancestors have been eating crabs for pretty much our entire existence. Although, perhaps a more conservative argument could be made that we only really started eating shellfish, like crustaceans, when we started to opportunistically exploit and then control fire. That way, we could properly cook our seafood and reduce the risk of food poisoning or picking up some kind of weird parasite. Once they could be cooked and safely eaten reliably, shellfish would have been an attractive option for our ancestors, as your typical crab or lobster or crayfish is relatively easy to hunt. You can set up a trap or ambush them, and they provide a decent serving of fats, protein, and micronutrients. As we've seen in the chimpanzees of the Nimba Mountains, it's possible that crustaceans were an important food source for various human populations year-round, especially for pregnant and nursing mothers and their babies. At first, these prawns, crabs, and crayfish would have been collected by hand, just as the monkeys and chimps do. Our ancestors may have even learned by watching them, seeing that scraping up the river mud would reveal crunchy, crawly snacks in the form of small riparian crabs. The development of simple fishing tools, like nets and trap pools, facilitated greater harvests, especially of prawns, and increased the proportion of seafood in the average person's diet. Forked stabbing devices, like tri-spears, made it easier to collect lobsters, crayfish, and crabs from deeper water. And as humans have continued to eat shellfish, including crabs and prawns, throughout our history, crab fishing has become a huge and lucrative industry. In the modern day, the methods used for crab fishing are industrial in scale and quite disruptive to seafloor ecologies. More than 10 million tons of crustaceans are harvested annually, and almost all of them are decapods. Crabs, lobsters, crayfish, prawns, shrimp, they're all hugely popular foods, eaten in countless variations by cultures across the planet. Consider your typical prawn. After it's been caught, the shell is removed, and usually the tail too. And then the digestive tract, called the sand vein, is removed, as it can have a gritty and unpleasant texture from all the sand that was ingested during the course of regular filter feeding. The larger shrimp and prawns will also have a large visible nerve cord, called a blood vein, that runs along their bellies that's typically removed as well. After the body has been prepared, the soft prawn can be cut up or mixed whole into almost any kind of meal, from soups and curries to stir-fry and rice dishes like jambalaya. They can be beer-battered, deep-fried, oven-roasted, boiled, barbecued, or mixed into soup. Shrimp and prawns can be a part of meals as complex as sushi to stuff as simple as cracker toppings or something to dip in cocktail sauce. Larger crustaceans, like lobsters and crabs, are prepared somewhat differently, as the animal is usually boiled or steamed alive, with the shell still on. The process of eating the crab or lobster then begins by taking them out of the boiling water, letting them cool a little bit, and then cracking and removing the shell to extract the soft, sweet muscle tissue inside. There's a neat little detail that one might notice when cooking a lobster. Most people may just assume that lobsters are orange, but lobsters are actually a bluish-green color, thanks to a pigment protein called crustacyanin. When crustacyanin is heated up, like when the lobster is getting cooked, the chemical breaks down into its constituent parts, which are smaller ketocarotenoid molecules called astaxanthins. It's this astaxanthin that has a red hue, and which turns the cooked lobsters orange. Astaxanthin is naturally produced by algae and yeast, which are then eaten by crabs and krill and other crustaceans. The astaxanthins can accumulate in their tissues, and they give the animal a red or a pink hue. This is how crabs, lobsters, salmon, trout, and even flamingos get their pink color. In cultures that are more sea-oriented, that have ready access to water and have developed many customs and technologies for fishing, their quarry often becomes objects of veneration and even worship. In other words, seafaring cultures that eat a lot of seafood generally tend to think highly of the fish and crustaceans that they hunt. This is a direct avenue through which crabs and other crustaceans have been adopted into our myths and legends. For example, consider the Moche peoples, a small group of farmers and artisans that lived along the northwestern coast of what is now Peru, around 2,000 to 1,500 years ago. They had received a complex irrigation network from their forebears, the Salinar culture, which in turn had received the vast coastal farmlands from their forebears, the Cupinique. This heritage of cultures had always supplemented their agricultural produce with animal flesh, fished out of the sea or hunted in the forests. The oldest culture, the Cupinique, had developed a complex religious belief system that involved a spider god, Ayapok, who was often portrayed as a cosmic decapitator with a jaguar's mouth and a human face. This unsettling spider god either encouraged or directly participated in the gruesome torture of war captives for their blood before beheading them in sacrifice. Now, the spider is just one form that this deity takes. It could also take the form of a man, or a bird, or a fish, or even some kind of twisted, unrecognizable demon monster. When the Moche culture emerged, they continued to propagate this belief system inherited down from the Cupinique, but they added two more forms that the deity could manifest: a scorpion and a crab. Precisely what this crab figure represented, and what the deity does in this crab form, is not known to me. But whatever the crab deity's role, it was apparently very important. The Moche are known for being a very artistic and vibrant culture that produced lots of pottery and artwork, and a ton of it depicts crabs and the crab form of Ayapok, the decapitator. He is depicted fighting a monstrous fish creature, or sometimes he himself is depicted as the victim of an imminent beheading, and in other pieces, the crab god is saved by vultures at the last moment. Beyond South America, crabs are present in all sorts of cultures, and not always as such ominous, bloodthirsty gods. One of the best-known cultural representations of the crab is the zodiac sign and constellation of Cancer. It's a rather dark constellation, composed of relatively dim stars that are difficult for the naked eye to discern. The constellation serves as a backdrop, or a canvas, for the sun during the summer solstice. This is actually how we came to define the Tropic of Cancer, which is enclosed by the highest latitudes in which the sun can be said to be directly overhead during the summer solstice. At least, this was the case thousands of years ago, when these systems of astronomical alignment were first set up. Nowadays, thanks to the precession of the equinoxes, the sun rises in the constellation of Gemini during the summer solstice, and not the constellation Cancer. In the ancient past, different cultures ascribed different animals to the Cancer constellation. The ancient Egyptians identified it as a scarab beetle, representing unending life. The Babylonians identified it as a tortoise or a snapping turtle, or, in other derivations, a crayfish. And the medieval Europeans identified it as a crayfish or a lobster. The common perception of it as a crab may have come from an ancient Greek myth about the monster-killing exploits of the demigod Heracles, or Hercules. According to the myth, Hera, wife of Zeus, hated Heracles. She hated him, as he was the son of Zeus born to another woman, Alcmene. Hera tortured and harassed Alcmene while she was pregnant, and when Heracles was finally born, Hera kept taunting and torturing him throughout his life. When you dig into the myths a little bit, they vary as to the exact sequence in which the following happened. But supposedly, Hera eventually drove Heracles mad and made him kill his own children. Zeus, having pity on Heracles, negotiated a deal. If the demigod could complete a series of difficult tasks, then he would be made an immortal god, and Hera would stop her endless spiteful torment of him. According to the myth, these labors involved gathering rare items or defeating powerful monsters. One of these monsters was the Lernaean Hydra, a multi-headed serpent-like dragon creature that guarded a lake in eastern Greece, believed to be a door or a gateway to the underworld. Depending on the storyteller you're listening to, the number of heads on this Hydra varies. 6, 7, 8, or 9 are usually common numbers, but later authors gave the Hydra the ability to regrow its heads as Heracles cut them off. Now, as this demigod, son of Zeus, battled the Hydra, Hera watched from her cosmic Olympian perspective. She wished for the Hydra to kill Heracles, but when he learned its weakness and began to gain the upper hand, she grew enraged. Now, at this point, the story kind of diverges a little bit. In the more fantastical descriptions, Hera sends a giant monstrous crab named Karkanos or Carcinos to attack Heracles. The great crustacean beast lumbered out of the lake to aid the Hydra, joining it in battle against Heracles. The demigod struggled greatly, even receiving a wound on his foot from the great crab, but eventually Heracles slew them both. In other versions of the story, like in the older, closer to the original story, the crab is depicted as more realistically tiny and realistically weak, inflicting only a minor but critical injury to Heracles' foot before being crushed under his sandaled heel. Hera, in her rage and grief, put both the Lernaean Hydra and the crab Carcinos into the sky to immortalize them as constellations. So this is the story behind the crab in the Cancer constellation. As is usually the case with these kinds of things, the story of Cancer the crab being turned into a constellation was lifted from an earlier Babylonian myth. The Babylonians looked up at the same dim arrangement of stars, and they saw Alutu, the great crayfish, which they associated with death and the underworld. These themes, perhaps derived from the crayfish's tendency to molt and shed its old skin to renew itself with a fresh exoskeleton, or to bury itself in the sediment at the bottom of a lake, are common crustacean imagery. Death and its inevitability, and the underworld, as well as rebirth, regeneration, and restoration, are also clear themes in the story of Heracles and the immortal Hydra, whose heads keep growing back. Throughout human history, these crustaceans have played strange, subtle, yet interesting roles in human culture and belief systems. They're almost always associated with water, and to a lesser degree, they represent things like change, growth and development, patience, persistence, and an ability to learn and adapt. Like many creatures that regularly shed their exoskeleton, they're also associated with the moon and its lunar phases, and with femininity and the menstrual cycle. In certain Native American customs, for example, crabs are seen as symbols of good fortune, wisdom, nurturing, and protection. Crabs have a very feminine energy, as they're associated with the moon, and cycles in life, like death and birth, and more abstractly, with the power of intuition and trust in oneself. Celtic belief systems also view the crab in a similarly positive light. Crabs are symbols of Arianrhod, the Celtic goddess of beauty, romance, and love, and Lu, the god of the sun. The Celts also tightly associate crabs with the cycles of the moon, life, death, rebirth, and change. Similarly, in many East Asian belief systems, the crab is a spirit of the water, with links to seafarers, sailing, fishing, and all things oceanic. It's also seen as a symbol of luck and strength, so a sailor finding a crab in his cot or getting pinched while on a voyage may be interpreted as a sign of good luck and happy outcomes. Various cultural mythologies from across Africa also associate crabs with good luck and more feminine qualities like fertility, birth, and the cycle of life. However, crabs and crustaceans often have more nuanced and complex associations that may not be entirely positive. For example, as we just mentioned a few minutes ago, Chinese culture associates the crab with seafaring and the ocean, but the ocean is fickle. Similarly, crabs are also associated with dishonesty. Although this isn't because the crabs are thought to bring about great storms and crashing waves that sink ships and men alike into the black and watery depths, it's because the crabs walk sideways, and that's totally suspicious. In Buddhist mythology, the crab is a symbol of death. Not the act or the literal death process, but the so-called sleep of death that exists as a state of being between one life and reincarnation in the next. This symbolism is based on the crab's molting cycle, wherein it struggles to escape the old, tightly fitting exoskeleton and be reborn, as it were, with a new one. Here's a well-known example. In Christian myth, the crab has a mixed reputation. On one hand, it was a symbol of charity and self-sacrifice. This is already a complex moral issue on its own, but the crab symbol works both ways. It represents both those who exemplify the virtues of charity, humility, a willingness to serve and help others, and those who lack these virtues and desperately need them. But on the other hand, crabs were sometimes viewed as an object of evil by the medieval European Christians. Here it had the reputation of being a trickster, greedy, and deceitful. This view is believed to have come from observations of crab behavior, namely the throwing of small stones into open oysters so they cannot close and make for easy prey. This was interpreted as a warning against deceit and trickery, or a call for constant vigilance against corrupting influences like lust and other sinful thoughts. Curiously, several South American peoples also saw the crab as symbolizing the corrupting influence of lust. Their artists depict the face of a crab as a vagina with teeth, whereas the pattern of bumps and horns on the crab's carapace are associated with the vulva. In the analogy, the crab is a symbol of both sexual restraint and sexual overindulgence. The crab's studded carapace, representing the vulva, is restraint, whereas the crab's face, representing the vagina with teeth, symbolizes the social risks and the health risks of being perhaps a little too randy in your Amazonian tribe. In both Judaism and early Christianity, crabs and crustaceans were not allowed in the diet. They were forbidden. They were seen as unclean. In the Torah, for example, there's the prohibition of the consumption of any sea life that doesn't have fins or scales. Now technically, lots of swimming crustaceans have fins on their pleopods, and many shrimp and lobsters also have a tail fan, but I suppose they don't look like fish fins, so they don't count, I guess. The crustaceans, along with many other shellfish like oysters and snails, are considered unclean and not to be consumed by humans. These religious dietary customs may have made sense back in the day when we didn't have things like high-quality food testing, reliable pasteurization or purification processes, or vaccines, antibiotics, or anti-parasite medications. Without any of these modern amenities, people had to be extra careful about what they ate. Even today, there are those who follow these religious rules out of a spiritual compunction, but for many others, these rules aren't necessarily protective or clean in a literal sense, but perhaps more in a figurative, metaphorical, or cultural sense. And many others don't care at all and will gladly devour a steaming hot crab omelet, or some beer-battered, crispy breaded jumbo prawns, or a smoking bowl of crab chowder with a few slices of hard-crust bread, or a toasted crawfish roll with red onions, chives, crisp lettuce, and a pound of sizzling hot fries with... you get the idea. Speaking of the modern-day crustaceans, I think, especially the decapods like crabs and lobsters, they've really become a very charismatic and well-known group of animals. They've found a particularly deep niche in modern science fiction, where the crustacean body form serves as inspiration and a model for all manner of alien creatures. The crustaceans have so many weird traits, like their segmentation, the disturbing number and shape of the legs, the creepy face with its mouthparts and eye stalks, and so on, that make them seem almost alien themselves. This is a trend that actually isn't that new. It's existed for a while now, and it continues into the modern day as popular as ever. An early example can be seen in the 1895 H.G. Wells dystopia, The Time Machine, wherein the time traveler eventually goes to the extreme far future. And in those distant eons, where life still crawls on the earth before the expanding sun snuffs it all out, he observes giant crab creatures hunting giant butterfly-like animals in a desert of red sand and lichen. Even in 19th century literary fiction, they were portrayed as creepy, almost alien-like creatures. There were ogre-like crab warriors and giant monstrous crabs in horror and adventure movies across the later half of the 20th century, including gems like Attack of the Crab Monsters in 1957, Ibira, Horror of the Deep in 1966, and Island Claws in 1980. In TV serials meant for children, like the Power Rangers TV show, among many others, it seemed like every other bad guy of the week was some crab-like mutant, or had giant claws that would be the envy of any Malakastrakan. I'd argue that some of the bugs in the 1997 film Starship Troopers were heavily inspired by both arachnids and crustaceans, like the low-level infantry-like warrior bug with big, spiky, snapping jaws. Crustaceans continued to be portrayed frequently in the 21st century. They were a lovable stereotype of the invertebrate monster, of a creature that represents something a bit more unusual or cryptic, more difficult to read and predict, more alien in thought and motion than a typical bipedal antagonist, or a monster of the fuzzy vertebrate variety. Like many things that live in the sea, they're both familiar to us, but they're also foreign and strange. Strange enough to serve as a believable placeholder for an alien species. Unfortunately, while the giant monster crab is an awesome idea, and it makes for super cool boss battles or enemy encounters in movies and video games, it's just not very realistic. The classic issue involves a total breakdown in oxygen distribution. If you just took a typical crab and made it 1,000 times bigger but otherwise unchanged, it wouldn't be able to absorb enough oxygen through its gills to diffuse through its body and sustain its own tissues. It would basically suffocate rapidly and die. Some sci-fi authors or screenwriters try to get around this by saying that the alien world or the primordial Earth or whatever has a higher oxygen content. But this is dubious at best. Crustacean vasculature isn't equipped or designed to sufficiently circulate oxygen and remove CO2 at the scale of an elephant or a hippopotamus. But another angle that's often unnoticed is the crustacean musculature. There's a very limited cylindrical volume within each limb, which can only contain so much muscle. The monster crab would need enough muscle to lift itself up and move around effectively, but it turns out that after a certain point, after you get big enough, the amount of muscle necessary requires a bigger exoskeleton. But that weighs more, requiring more muscle. That requires a bigger exoskeleton, which weighs more, and you quickly run into a recursive barrier. In effect, the crab body form can only get so big before it can't realistically sustain itself anymore. Where that limit is, precisely, I'm not entirely sure, although there's estimates that the 4-kilogram coconut crab, with its 1-meter leg span, may represent something like the largest possible terrestrial arthropod in our modern environment. Of course, in the fossil record, there's giant millipedes and stuff that can be over 2 meters long, but these animals have smaller bodies that are lower to the ground, and long and narrow. Crabs and other lobsters are much more centralized, with thick, cylindrical or disc-shaped bodies and heavier, more robust legs. This centralized body form appears to reach its limits at about 5 or 6 kilograms, before respiration via gills is simply not enough to sustain the body. Beyond the stereotypical monster crab, there's also the influence that crustaceans have had on the sci-fi and fantasy genres as a whole. For example, aliens of all types, depicted in all kinds of media, from books to film, have drawn inspiration from the crustaceans. Perhaps one of the most distinctive examples in the 21st century are the aliens in the 2009 film District 9, which have deeply shrimp or crab-like faces, particularly in their mouthparts and their eyes and their antennae. These intelligent biped aliens are literally called prawns by the people in the film because of their crustacean-like appearance. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Many other aliens are based on crustaceans. The facehuggers in the 1979 film Alien, directed by James Cameron, are probably based on the creepy, deep-sea parasitic amphipods of the Phryneima genus. Characters in popular media are also sometimes based on crustaceans, like Plankton from SpongeBob SquarePants, who is a cyclopean copepod. Zoidberg from Futurama is a spoof of the crustaceans, poking fun at their claws and antennae, their complex larval development, their gross mating rituals, their many slimy body parts, and their disgusting diet. And most recently, the 2022 blockbuster Avatar 2, which was set mostly in the water, included many crab-like creatures in the background, and crab-like submersible robots that the human bad guys used to kill Pandora's giant whales. These crab-like submersibles weren't particularly useful or heavily featured, but they were a neat little bit of machinery that demonstrated the ingenuity of the antagonists, and they added some creativity and mechanical novelty to the world building. And then there's the countless alien critters based on crustaceans that authors and filmmakers and game designers use to populate their worlds and make them seem authentic and realistically wild and diverse. Crustaceans are ideal for this, as they really are a fantastic and beautiful admixture of the familiar and the alien. I'm thinking of games as diverse as Half-Life and World of Warcraft. Humans have also derived much more practical lessons from the crustaceans. In the realms of science and engineering, the crustaceans have been the source of a number of important discoveries and technological developments. For example, consider the chitin polymers in crab and shrimp shells. The shells are harvested, ground to powder, and then processed to isolate the chitin. By removing the acetyl groups on the chitin polymer with something like sodium hydroxide, the substance can be transformed into chitosan. And chitosan is a remarkable substance, with a ton of uses in all sorts of fields. The substance itself is also a polymer. It's biodegradable, water-soluble, and it exhibits adhesive properties to negatively charged surfaces. For these reasons, it's been extensively researched in medical applications, like wound repair. Chitosan can bind to fibrinogen, a natural promoter of platelet formation, and it can bind ionically to organic acids that promote hemostasis. This means that it can participate in reactions that promote clotting and prevent blood loss. Chitosan has also been integrated into wound dressings of both fabric and hydrogel varieties, and it shows exceptional ability to stick to wounds and seal them closed. Chitosan has also been used as a base for medical hydrogels with acid and temperature-sensitive activity. These chitosan-based hydrogels can be loaded up with drugs and then injected in a liquid form into a patient's body. They react to the temperature environment and become an insoluble gel, which then releases the drug slowly over long periods of time. In this way, chitosan hydrogels can be used to deliver regular doses of medicine over a lengthy healing process without invasive surgeries or repeated injections. As a quick aside, there's also been research into the medical value of the protein-rich organic adhesives used by barnacles to fuse to their substrate. These barnacle-produced substances may also represent a safe, non-toxic organic glue that can be used to repair injuries and facilitate healing. A lot of this stuff is of great interest to trauma hospitals and the military because of its application and potential value for dealing with wounds, open wounds like trauma, blast damage, car accidents, bullet wounds, you name it. Chitosan can even be processed to form a plastic-like material, which can be shaped or molded into virtually anything, from cups to utensils to parts and pieces of toys, machines, even implants and prosthetics. Unlike the plastics derived from petroleum hydrocarbons, chitosan-based materials are biodegradable, and they can actually be recycled efficiently, and they're non-toxic. Chitosan's useful properties have found applications in fields far beyond healthcare and medicine. Chitosan has been used for a long time as a fining agent when making wines and beers and other alcoholic drinks, although admittedly, this chitosan was historically derived from fungi and not crustaceans. Chitosan has been used in water filtration systems as it's extremely effective at filtering out small particles, heavy minerals, and oils. In fact, chitosan-based materials are one of the best tools to use for cleaning up oil spills, as it doesn't leave behind any new waste or damage the local habitat in some way distinct from the oil itself. Perhaps the most intensive and long-standing use of chitosan is seen in agriculture. Chitosan salts mixed into the soil can greatly improve plant health by altering metabolic processes and gene expression. Plants treated with chitosan are more robust, with stronger immune systems, better able to fend off fungal parasites and insect pests. They're more efficient photosynthesizers, and they're better at absorbing nutrients. Their seeds are sturdier and healthier, their fruit and flower yields are greater, and they're less likely to rot or be infected. Chitosan is an extremely potent and beneficial agricultural additive, and it has almost no negative side effects on the ecology or the health of the humans who end up eating the fruit or vegetables. In that sense, it's an extremely valuable agricultural resource for the future. Chitosan is being researched for a ton of other applications too, because it just has so many useful properties. Mind you, not all of these lines of research will yield useful results, but some of them will, and this is the fun part of exploring these types of chemicals. These apparently safe, very bioreactive compounds are super interesting to research because the limits of their chemical properties are totally unknown. Studying stuff like this could lead to discovery after discovery, even if there's 5 inconclusive results for every breakthrough. For example, chitosan is currently being explored as a potential weight loss supplement, although the data seems to suggest that it's not very effective in this regard. Now that's a bummer, but there's a ton of other candidate drugs being tested for this purpose, and in the meantime, chitosan is showing exceptional utility as an electrolyte that facilitates redox reactions in rechargeable batteries. Being able to improve rechargeable battery technology with a biodegradable and safely recyclable substance would be a huge boon, both economically and environmentally. Recent research has found that strands of yarn coated in chitosan exhibit unique fluid control properties. Different size strands can differentially alter the flow rates of fluids moving across them. By combining certain size strands and certain orientations, fluids can be wicked or moved in specific ways. This may have practical applications in everything, from clothing to water management inside of vehicles like cars, planes, boats, submarines, and even spacecraft. Now, chitosan is really wicked. It's super cool and all that, but the crustaceans have so much more to teach us. For example, their body form and their movement styles have inspired biomimetic machinery. The so-called robo-krill is a swimming robot designed to look and move like a krill. Such robots could one day be equipped with tiny cameras or sensors, and they could be deployed in small swarms or schools. The idea is that this could be an innovative way to explore complex marine habitats, like coral reefs, with hydrodynamically efficient machines that don't disrupt, disturb, or damage the habitats they're studying. Now, we talked about these guys a fair bit in the Malacostracan episodes, but the mantis shrimp is a crustacean with a remarkably sophisticated visual system, capable of detecting all types of polarized light and converting light between linear and circular polarized states. By studying the complex optical anatomy of the mantis shrimp, researchers have been making really exciting progress in developing more advanced quarter-wave plates for various light detection and light manipulation systems that are used in phones and TV screens and other electronics and stuff like that. Improving these quarter-wave plate designs could improve fidelity of the image, the types of light that could be used for certain applications, as well as general improvements in energy efficiency. Similarly, mantis shrimps have a certain arrangement of chitin fibers in their claws that makes them really sturdy. The mantis shrimps lash out at both prey and predators with their famous punches, which can move at 23 meters a second, and they hit with a force of hundreds of newtons. This tiny shrimp can shatter snail shells and fracture crab armor. It's incredible, and equally impressive is the fact that the mantis shrimp's claws themselves don't break apart after hundreds or thousands of hits. It turns out that their claws are so durable because they have a helicoidal arrangement of chitin fibers inside them. Experimentation has revealed that this arrangement of these helicoidal fibers, is very effective at absorbing impact energy. This has informed the design and construction of body armors and other laminate surfaces that need to be able to take a lot of impact damage and not break or get punctured or fall apart. Speaking of armor, the crustaceans have inspired various types of body armor for many centuries. Metal armor composed of multiple overlapping plates is often called lobster armor, referring to the interlocking, overlapping exoskeletal plates of the lobster. These armor plates provide full body protection, while preserving some degree of movement and flexibility at the joints and along the abdomen and the waist. And the crustaceans continue to inspire armor designs into the modern day. Modern body armor is often heavy, uncomfortable, and can limit the arm's range of movement. Scientists at MIT are trying to design a more flexible, lightweight armor based on the softer exoskeletal tissue near a lobster's joints. This material is very strong and very damage resistant, but it's also flexible because of its complex internal structure. Current research is seeking to develop armor, but such a material could also be used when designing prosthetics and bioengineering artificial tissues, and even as material for soft robotics. Crustaceans also use a magnesium-moderated mineralization process to control the hardening rate of their shells after each molt. Scientists have studied this mineralization process and uncovered reactions between magnesium and both calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate. The magnesium moderation acts like an on-off switch for the mineralization process, and the researchers speculate that this could be used to create dynamic metamaterials, like some kind of carbonate-based substance whose texture or rigidity could be adjusted as desired. As we've gone through this episode, you may have noticed that almost everything we talked about, almost everything, involved crabs, and to a lesser degree, lobsters, crayfish, and then prawns and shrimp. There are lots of crustaceans, especially the smaller ones, that I have hardly talked about at all. This is because, before modern science, lots of these smaller crustaceans hadn't even been discovered, or they weren't recognized as crustaceans. For example, some water fleas were only recognized in the 1840s. The mastacocarids were discovered in 1939. The cephalocarids were discovered in 1955. And the Ramapedia were discovered in 1979 in a cave on the Bahamas. In comparison, we've been hunting crabs and lobsters for tens or hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years, throughout our entire hominin evolutionary history. We're much more familiar with the crabs and the lobsters, and this is why they've earned a place in our cultures, in our art, and our mythology. And with that said, I think we've come to the end of the show. This was a mind-blowing exploration of the relationship between humans and crustaceans, and all the ways in which we use and learn from them. Hopefully the next time you look at a crab or a lobster and think about the ways in which they're both familiar and alien to us, you'll spend a little more time thinking about the familiar. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button or give it a 5-star review. In our next series, we're going to explore the anatomy, life cycle, behavior, evolution, and ecology of the insects. So if you want to get in on that, then hit the subscribe button. And as always, thanks for listening.